Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our study, Meant for Good. The book of Genesis, the last 14 chapters, the story of Jacob and his sons. The starring character, probably the lead character here is Joseph, but it's going to be about Judah, and it's going to be in Canaan, and then it's going to be in Egypt, and we've got a lot of moving parts. If you remember last week from our study, we looked at fractured families, and we're reminded that sadly, a lot of times, even amongst God's people, there can be bad family dynamics. We know that there was jealousies and there was insecurities and family members hating each other. There was violence and abuse, broken contracts. It was some bad things. And yet God knows how to take His story and work it out for good, because His story is meant for good. We studied the life of Joseph as a young man who had dreams, and his brothers hated him, and they sold him into slavery. And then we were introduced a little bit more to the fourth oldest brother there, Judah, who started off with some bad behavior, some bad motives. And yet God began to soften his heart, and he's going to become a leader now in this story. Well, in this week's episode, we are looking at chapter 39, and make sure you're reading through the Genesis chapters as we go. And we're going to look at the providential presence and the loyal love of God. God's presence in prison. Have you ever been going through difficult times? Do you feel God's presence even through those situations? Well, chapter 39, the story picks back up with Joseph. Remember the last time we saw him in chapter 37, he had just been sold out of a pit by his brothers to a caravan of slave traders that was going down to Egypt. And then 38, we had the story of Judah. Well, now we pick back up with Joseph in Egypt. And it starts off in chapter 39, verse 2. 4 times in this chapter, you're going to see this little phrase, the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. Remember, God means it for good. So even though the clouds are dark and maybe it's raining in your life, just keep your eye on it. God is going to navigate you through, and He's going to be with you through the storms. 4 times in verse 2, 3, 21, and 23, it says that the Lord was with Joseph. He wasn't going to abandon him in Egypt. Well, Joseph does get down to Egypt, and capital city may be Memphis at this time, not Elvis's home, but Memphis there along the Nile. And this might be the 12th dynasty. We're not exactly sure which Pharaoh this is at the time, but he is bought by a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar is a designation for the chief of the palace guard, or he's one of Pharaoh's chief staff members. And so Potiphar is very important. Obviously, he has a good eye. He can just tell that Joseph is a good man and somebody that he wants on his household staff. Potiphar, verse 3 says that he notices that Joseph is successful. Whatever he puts in his hand to manage or to take care of, he's always successful. God was with him. Now, let me just pause right here. The place you work, your supervisor, your boss, the owner of the company, could they say that about you? In other words, the work that you're doing, does God just put His blessing on it? Not maybe because of the owner or the supervisor or your co-workers, but does God bless the work because of you? And are you so trustworthy that the leader looks and says, I've got 10 different employees, but I tell you what, I trust her with the project. I trust him with this account. That's the kind of integrity and character that Joseph had. Well, verses 4 through 6, again, it says that he found favor in Potiphar's eyes. Sadly, unlike chapter 37, where he did not find favor with his brothers. And like with his dad, Jacob, it says that Potiphar completely entrusted his household, his accounts to him. And so this is going to be a theme through Joseph's life, is that whatever he's given, he's trusted with it, it flourishes and there is fruit and success from it. And I would pray that for your work and for my work as well. Well, not only is he smart and he's a good manager and he's a hard worker, Joseph's also good looking. The Bible actually in verses 7 through 10 tells us that he is an attractive young man. He's getting in his 20s now. But unfortunately, his attractiveness attracted the wrong kind of attention. And Potiphar's wife, we're not told her name, but Potiphar's wife takes a notice to him and she watches him. And eventually she actually comes to him straight out and says, I want you to go to bed with me. It's a stark temptation. Here's a young man in a foreign land. Nobody knows him. Nobody's going to know about this. And this woman of power says, come to bed with me. I wonder what you would do in this kind of temptation. Well, he gives a very straightforward answer, and we see through every chapter and through every episode of Joseph's life, we see into the heart of his character. And his answer shows what's in his heart. And he says no. He says, I can't do this because I have too much respect for three different things. First of all, he says, I respect my work, my stewardship, my job. I've been given all of these accounts. I'm in charge of Potiphar's household. Like, he's given everything to me. I have too much respect for the stewardship, for the management, responsibility that I've been given. I'm not going to ruin it by going to bed with you. Number two, he says, I have too much respect for my boss. I do respect Potiphar. He is my authority. He is the supervisor. He's the leader, and I'm not going to disrespect him by taking his wife. And the highest thing that he says, the most important one, is this. He says, by the way, here's the third thing. I have too much respect for my God. And she's not a God believer, obviously. She's not a Yahweh follower, but he is. And he says, I respect God, and I have too much respect for him and his ways to do this wicked thing. So no, because of my job and responsibility. No, because of my leader. I don't want to break this relationship. And no, because of my love for God. Could you answer the same way? Could I answer the same way? Well, you'd like to say, well, so she said, oh, I didn't know that you were a believer of God. I'll leave you alone. And she comes after him day after day, it says. We don't know how many days she tempts him. Why don't you come in here with me? Come into the bedroom with me. Sleep with me. We don't know how many times. And sadly, sometimes we've stood up to one temptation or two, but when there's just this onslaught. Now, in the New Testament, we'll be told this. And God says, there's no temptation that comes against you, but I'll always provide an exit. There's always an exit door. There's always an exit sign if you are being tempted. He couldn't get away from it. He's working there. He is a servant. And one day he goes into the house. He looks around. There's no servants around. There's nobody around. He wants to get some work done. Evidently, he'd been trying to stay away from the house. Well, she comes into the house and she catches him. And she actually assaults him. Verses 11 through 19. She assaults him. There's no other way to say it. She grabs a hold of him physically. She grabs his coat and says, let's go to bed. This is the second disrobing in the story. She grabs a hold of his outer coat, and he does the smartest thing a young man or an old man or woman can do. He runs out of there. She actually assaults him, and he runs out of the house. Again, the reminder here we're taught in the Bible, specifically in 2 Timothy 2, verses 22, and it says, Paul says this, flee youthful lust. I've talked with some people sometimes where they said, well, I'm just going to stand against evil and I'll just stand there day after day in this relationship or working in this situation. And you know what? If you can get away from it, run away. Smarter people than you have fallen, wiser people, older people than you have fallen, more powerful people. What makes you think that you won't fall? Don't try to stand and fight. Get away from it. Matthew Henry, In the old commentary, he says, it is better to lose a good coat than lose a good conscience. Charles Swindoll says, there is no sin in the bait that tempts you. The sin is in the bite, the tasting of it. And so he runs out. Well, she accuses him. She accuses him, and she goes outside and says, I was yelling because this man, this Hebrew, attacked me. Well, nobody heard her yelling. And then Potiphar gets home, and she tattles on him, and she makes up this lie. Notice she says, that Hebrew slave that you brought into this house. She plays the race card, okay? They are Egyptians. This Hebrew man, they kind of look down on the Hebrews anyway, and she accuses him. Well, Potiphar blows up. He could have had him executed, but maybe Potiphar kind of has suspicions about the moral integrity of his own wife, and he throws him in the king's prison. He doesn't execute him, and he doesn't just throw him in common prison. It says he threw him in the king's prison with the king's prisoners. And you need to see how God's providence is working even here, because it's in the king's prison when Joseph meets the king's prisoners that will actually give him a leg up, a connection into the palace where God wants him to eventually get. Well, when he's there, verse 21 tells us something very powerful. It says that God showed him loyal love. It's the Hebrew word hesed, and it's the idea of kindness. But it's not just being nice to him. It's God's faithful, loyal love. The Bible tells us that God's loyal love is on his people, on his sons and daughters. It never fails, it never falters, it never expires, it never runs out when you are getting taken into hard times. It never ends. Well, the warden, as he gets into that prison situation, the warden, like Potiphar, realizes Joseph is a man of integrity, and he has real skill and talent, and he trusts him. The Bible says that he completely entrusted the management of the prison to Joseph. You know, it reminds us of Christ. Remember, Christ is all through this story of Joseph. Christ was faithful in the face of temptation. You remember the devil himself tempted Christ 40 days, and Jesus stood up to it. And Jesus, like Joseph, Jesus was unjustly accused and taken before authorities. And so we continue to see his picture. Well, as you go to your study and your personal study and your groups, I want us to remember these things. First of all, we have to work to earn the full trust of all people. We need to have integrity all through the different areas of our life. Be reminded that light attracts darkness. That may sound strange, but in a lot of occasions, if you're healthy, if you are walking in the light, darkness will come after you, because darkness can't stand light. And you do need to be prepared to be tempted. Doing right does not eliminate evil, but it will give you the power to stand up against the evil. Keep your eyes higher. Don't look at your situation. Keep your eyes higher. Keep your eyes on your job responsibility and your boss. Keep your eyes higher on your marriage contract and on your spouse. And most importantly, keep your eyes not on the situation, but on the sovereign God who is taking care of you. So there you are in prison. What do? You might feel right now, I'm in prison. It's a bad situation. What do? Let me tell you what you do. Do your best. Do your best. Be faithful. Don't look around the situation that you're in. Just keep your eyes on the Lord. Remember that character is who you are everywhere at all times, so have character. Character is who you are when no one else is looking. You're in Egypt. You're on a business trip. Nobody will ever know. God is watching. God is there, and He will take care of you. God is in the pit. God is in the prison. He's not going to leave you. So walk with Him as He makes the story head towards good. God bless you.